Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Interacting with People with Disability. So this webinar is targeted to anyone who is volunteering in the community services sector who'd like to become more confident and respectful interacting with people with disability. Having said that, disability inclusion, of course, is not restricted to the community services sector. So hopefully what we share with you today, you'll be able to transfer into other areas of your life and just making a difference in society as a whole. So the presenters today is myself. My name is Janeen Harris. I'm a Senior Project Officer at LEAP. I work specifically in the Volunteer Solutions team, and I'll tell you a bit more about that in a minute. And this is?
Myself is Jed Walker. That's me in the loud shirt. I'm the head of learning and development here, and I train people face to face, and this is quite exciting, having the wider reach through the webinar.
Sure is. And if you're just joining us at the moment, we're just getting people to write what they like to do on the weekend in the chat panel. And also, sorry, we should also mention that we have another staff member signing in the webinar today. His name's Chris, and you can see him there in the right corner. Chris, can we hear you?
Yes, you can. Hello, everyone.
And Chris, what's your role here at LEAP?
I am the project assistant for the digital inclusion team.
Fabulous. And we may mention Chris a couple of times in the webinar and have a little special thing at the end. So if you haven't found your chat, where's this? You should be seeing a screen like this with the slides, and on the right hand, oops, sorry, I've moved along. On the right hand side, you should have a little panel with our faces, and there's a little 3 dots that you can click on to open up the chat panel. So hopefully you've all found that nicely. Yeah.
Now we should mention too, Chris himself is an expert on disability inclusion, because he himself has a disability and he's got limited use of his limbs, and he works here at LEAP, but he has certain accommodations made for him, like we're just putting in a ramp and rail at the moment to allow him to be included more easily in the workplace, and so he can get around. So Chris will be providing some first-hand experience insights as we go through as well.
So just a little bit about LEAP. As we mentioned, and Chris mentioned, he's in the digital inclusion team. So digital inclusion includes a LEAP in Lab that we have here. It's one-to-one mentoring, helping people with improve their digital literacy and remove exclusion that can come about with not having certain skills to access things via the internet. So, for example, MyGov, even just email communications, receiving bills, and so forth. So helping people learn how to access those, online shopping as well, for example. We also, at the moment, are spreading right out and having outreach programs across Western Sydney and hopefully eventually across New South Wales and beyond. And we also help people establish their own digital literacy programs as well. So if you're interested in that and would like to find out more, you can go to email us, hello@leep.ngo, and Himali will be able to give you some more information about that. Volunteer Solutions is in my team. So we help support volunteer involving organisations across Western Sydney. and we support volunteer managers in training, managing and recruiting volunteers. The main thing that we do is we have a volunteer referral service, so we help volunteers find roles in the community, and we help organisations find volunteers. So I do a lot of talking to people about their motivations and why they want to volunteer, and match them up to roles. So yeah, so this is actually our first webinar. So we do a lot of volunteer training as well, face-to-face for volunteers. This is our first webinar targeted at volunteers. So it's an exciting new development for us. So we hope you enjoy it.
Okay, so this is our basic framework for talking about disability inclusion. That you're going to need some knowledge around the disability field, and then armed with that knowledge, when you are seeking to interact with a person with a disability, you might notice something that they need or something that's happening, and then with your knowledge, you will be able to take some action. We don't want people just, as so often happens in the public space, acting and interacting with people with disabilities without any knowledge, because often they just annoy a person with a disability by saying or doing something that happens all the time, that the person with a disability experiences, and it's just not too pleasant for them. For example, you may notice my hairstyle, and with little kids, they often say to me, "Why haven't you got any hair? You're bald," and things like that. Now, that's fine, they're kids, but if every adult I came across said that to me, it'd get old pretty quick. Even older than me. Okay, so example here. We would like you to know, for instance, how to help a blind person cross the street. Now, we're not going to cover every situation for every disability in this webinar. That's not realistic. But we would like you to know that you need to know things like that. If you're working, particularly, or if you're seeing a lot of a person with a type of disability, then you need to do some research and find out. So you know what to do in that situation. So you need to notice, oh, there's a person, they're trying to cross the street, they need help, I've got some knowledge, and now I'm gonna act and step up and do the correct thing. Now, once upon a time, I thought the correct thing was to go and grab them by the arm and haul them across the road. Now I know, I stop, I introduce myself, and I ask if they want any help. So just to reiterate, we'll be referring, and you'll see the headings as we go through, what you need to know, and then a little bit about noticing, and then a little bit about taking action in the situation. So to begin with, about on the knowledge side of things, oh, I just lost everything. Hang on a sec. Okay, here we are. I'm going to give you time, and please type in the chat if I'm not giving you time. I'm going to give you time to read what's on the slide first. So that's what we're going to look at now. Some categories of disability. There's various ways of categorizing. Oops, okay. Did I just skip one there? Let's just see. No, I didn't. Okay. When you think of a disability, what ideas or images come to mind? Please type in the chat some ideas or images that come to mind when you hear the word disability. Great. Wheelchair, physical disabilities, wheelchair. Good.
Any others?
Any advance on wheelchair? Assistance required. Good. Blind. Good. A carer, physical impairments, support worker, mobility restricted, non-visible, sometimes unseen and misunderstood.
Good answers.
Wheelchairs, walking cane, autism, speech difficulties.
Great.
All right, thank you. Thank you for those. Misconception of abilities.
Next slide.
Good one. Yeah, next slide. Okay, now some of you, yeah, so think of a type of impairment or disability and type it in the chat. So a type of. Interpret that how you wish.
Yeah.
Okay. Intellectual, autism, mental illness, often overseen as a disability. Thank you, Tally. Blind, vision impairment, different to blind. Somebody's typed there physical, mental, intellectual, sort of categorised. When I deliberately left that open. Learning disabilities, cerebral palsy,
Down syndrome. I think one.
Yep. Okay, good. So we're seeing a good range there, and we're getting the idea that not just physical, not always obvious, like mental illness. You wouldn't know someone particularly had a disability. So we're broadening out from our first thing, which is perfectly normal that would come to mind, which is wheelchair. All right, so one way of categorising, simple way, physical.
That looks safe.
It looks easy going down. Going
Doesn't
up.
look like a very accessible building.
Yeah. You're welcome to type any comments in there. Tally has raised her hand. What would you like to say, Tally? Just type it in the chat. No?
That's okay.
Okay, we'll keep going. Cognitive, it's to do with thinking. For example, memory. There you can see a child using an app to communicate what it is they want. Of course, we used to use the little Compic cards. And social, and we give the example of Sheldon from Big Bang Theory. So 4 categories there. That's just one way of categorising. Oh, finally, multiple, where you get a bunch of those things together, as in the case of Stephen Hawking. Now, from the National Disability Services, we get a whole list of their categorisations. I'll let you read those.
And if anyone wants us to read the slide to you, because I'm not sure how, if you are vision impaired, I'm not sure if your software can read our slides, so please type in the chat box that you'd like us to read it, if you'd like us to read anything out that's on the slide.
Okay, now we've got a poll question for you. And again, this is around, well, what exactly is a disability? What does it mean? What's the definition? So we pop up the poll here. And you'll get to click a box.
love watching polls, all the answers coming in. You just never know how it's going to go. That's 3, 4, 10 people answered so far. We've got 10 answers so far.
I'm wondering what you clicked there, Tally, if it was no, unsure, it depends. We can't tell who's clicking what.
Okay.
I'm thinking the rest of you might be advised to click unsure.
Any last ones coming in? We can end that. Oh.
Oh, you can't see the poll, Ruth. I don't know why. I'm sorry. I'm seeing a lot of people voting in the poll. I'll tell you what the questions are. The question is dwarfism a disability? And the options are yes, no, unsure, or it depends. So we'll tell you the results of the poll as it stands. 46% are unsure. 31% are yes, dwarfism is a disability. 15% are no, it's not. And the remainder, 8%, are it depends.
Well, and another 4 from Ruth, so that percentage should be a little bit higher. So just under.
Yeah, quite a bit higher.
Yeah,
quite a bit higher.
Yeah.
In fact, that would be a pretty even spread between yes, unsure, and it depends. So only the minority say no. Now that's a deliberately, tricky question. We're going to end the poll now.
Share results.
And we'll share the results, but we couldn't add ourselves 4 more people onto it depends. So
yeah, can you see the shared results, Ruth? Just curious. Sorry, Jed.
No, okay. So the most common answers are along the lines of unsure and it depends. And the least common answer is no. So let's just explore this really quite tricky categorisation. So what does the Disability Discrimination Act 1992 define disability as? Okay, we'll get to that, but we can tell you right now that people who have dwarfism do not consider themselves to have a disability, most of them. And you can see here, hidden away, there's some pretty capable people with dwarfism. However, the Act does protect them from discrimination. Now, let's look at the definition legally and see where dwarfism might fit in. So we've got the total or partial loss of a person's bodily or mental functions, partial or loss of part of the body. So that, that's how people are born, so they haven't lost anything. So we'll say no.
No.
No, could you just talk to that one?
We also have the presence in the body of organisms causing disease or illness, so that doesn't really fit. And the malfunction, malformation or disfigurement of a part of the person's body. What were you going to say about that one?
Well, are we seeing a malfunction or malformation or disfigurement in the person's body? No, it's a different shaped person, but we know that people come in all shapes and sizes. A disorder or malfunction that results in the person learning differently? Nope. a disorder, disease, or illness that affects thought processes, perception of reality, emotions or judgment, or results in disturbed behaviour? No. So far, we really haven't got, from these definitions, that a person with dwarfism would have a disability. However, their rights are protected from the viewpoint of discrimination. Now, on the left here, we have these hockey players who don't have lower limbs. So they would qualify as having a disability, because we would call that, as far as locomotion goes, a malfunction, something that they cannot easily do. They can't walk around, so that would definitely qualify as a disability by these definitions. And most of the disabilities that you've mentioned in the chat so far would fit, I think you'd agree, one of those definitions.
Yeah.
I'll just let you feast your eyes on those for a moment. Okay, so we've looked at categories of disability. Now we're going to look at some things you need to know when you talk about disability. And you're probably aware that this is somewhat changed over time. We used to use some, words like crippled and so on that we don't use anymore. Then we got into sort of going possibly a bit far the other way, and we talked about differently abled, and use the terms like hearing impaired and vision impaired for people who are deaf or blind and have no vision or no hearing at all. So that's not, that's sort of, yes, it's an impairment, but it's a bit more than that. And people say in the deaf community, they identify as deaf, not hearing impaired, which means, you can't hear very well. So probably gone back to some more frank language, but not language that stereotypes or raises some bad ideas in people's minds, which we'll shortly go into. All right, another poll. We've got our woman on the left, and there's one term that should not be used. Oh, there could be multiple terms. You can click as many boxes as you like in this poll. I'm sorry if you can't see it. Oh, how can I get this poll?
Oh, stop sharing. No, like.
Sorry.
Stop share results.
Stop share results. Go away. Okay, next poll. Correct language. Okay, so I'll tell you, well, you can probably see actually what the questions are. Sorry about this, it's my clumsy mousing. All right, I'm just trying to make a bit of room on the screen, because I know some people will be able to see the poll now, and some people can't see the poll, but for whatever reason, I still want you to be able to see the question. So there's the question. Boom, boom, boom. Incoming, our answers are suggesting that the word midget, 82% say it should not be used, 85% say it should not be used. And we're seeing an average of 2 responses for the other terms there. Person with dwarfism, there's a couple of answers. Dwarf, there's a couple of answers. Little person, there's a couple of answers. And person of short stature, there's a couple of answers. Well, there's one. One saying we shouldn't use that term ever. Now, yeah, you can end the polling there. Okay, so midget is the clear winner in terms of terms that we shouldn't use, and that agrees with what people with dwarfism all over the world say. That is the insulting one. in various parts of the world, all these other terms are used. And in Australia, probably the most common one is a person of short stature. The word dwarf used to be out, but now it's been reclaimed by people with dwarfism. And it's okay to use it, although the term person with dwarfism is often the preferred term internationally.
And if you're working or engaging with someone, just ask them what they prefer as well, because it does come down to personal preferences as well. Get rid of the const option.
Showing you the results there. Okay, focusing on the person, not the impairment. This means that if you're interacting with a person with a disability, and in the moment, there's no need to discuss some aspect of the disability, then we don't talk about it. Now, I'll just explain the difference between an impairment and disability. The impairment is more suggestive of what you are prevented from doing. So you might not be able to, for example, read. That would be that's your vision impairment, and it prevents you from doing something.
And that's from the social model, isn't it?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
From the social model definition of disability.
Yeah.
That you have an impairment.
Yeah, and what we need to know is how that impairment can be overcome by some technology, by some knowledge, or by some aid that stops it being an impairment anymore.
Turns from a disability and then to being able. Yeah,
because the impairment is overcome. So one thing that people with impairments find is that to make conversation, if you meet someone at the bus stop, people will immediately start talking about their impairment and what's it like and blah, blah, blah. And like I say, with having no hair, little kids sort of do that with me, and that's okay, but it gets very, very boring for people who get it all the time. And
I was going to say, what do you reckon, Chris? Would you agree?
What's that? Sorry?
When people comment on your disability?
It can, especially for adults, like how Jed was just saying, like little kids, they're innocent, so they really don't know unless the parents explain it to them. But with adults, it can get old very fast.
Sorry, Jed.
Okay. So some examples of first person language. The person comes first. Person with a disability. Person who is deaf. Person who have low vision. Rather than deaf person.
And again, I think it also comes down to personal preference as well. So like, for example, I just read on good old Facebook this week a comment. I was reading a discussion. It was in a video about people who work with autism, and they were sharing their stories. And in the comment section, there was a young woman who actually said, "You'll find the majority of autistics, myself included, prefer to identify as autistic rather than person with autism." And she said, what did she call it? It's not a fashion accessory. So that was her point of view in how she prefers to be referred to. So I just thought I'd share that little observation that I noticed on the
Yeah, and as we've noted, this what we should be, the language we should be using, it tends to change over time. So there's an example. Like I said before, people, we didn't used to say deaf, we didn't used to say dwarfism. Now we do, and from what Janeen just said, maybe some people would prefer to be simply called autistic rather than person with autism. Yeah, but you know, there's probably going to be disagreements within those communities about what the best term is.
Yeah, and that's why we always need to have a person-centered approach when we are dealing with people with disability. So we can have all of these general guidelines, that I wouldn't say they're rules, they're guidelines, and then when you're engaging with someone on a personal level, it's getting to know that person and what they like and dislike and being respectful about that.
Yeah. Right, I'll just let you read that.
I think I would hazard a guess that these particular points would be quite agreeable in many communities.
Yeah. I hope it's clear that these words are sort of supposed to inspire pity, but it's not a very useful emotion, and it's not something that we often want to be on the end of. Like, who wants to be told, I feel sorry for you because you've got no hair or whatever, you know? Here's some money to make you feel better. It's just not empowering. And things like wheelchair bound, it's quite the opposite of the purpose of a wheelchair. Wheelchairs allow more freedom. They allow people to get around whereas they wouldn't be able to. So bound is really not the correct term. Okay, I'll let you have a look at that. We are going to send you a little resources page with links on it. And one of the links is the day in the life of a person with dwarfism in New York. And he goes around with a camera on him. And it's very interesting to see how people react and respond just to seeing him. Often people take photos and they get some really crass and stupid comments like, where's Snow White and that sort of thing, you know. So I hope it's obvious to you that you shouldn't be making jokes to people, even if they're incredibly funny. They would have heard them, no doubt, 1,000 times before. So just lay off.
Yeah, funny, I get that all the time. And there's someone saying to the one of the what are they?
Oh, we'll just call them goats.
Saying to the other one, not cool, advocating that it's not appropriate behaviour. Yeah. That's part of our role in raising consciousness and fighting stereotyping, to let people know, hey, don't do that. And that may go around, you know, people's use of language as well, like people saying, oh, that's, you know, you're being retarded or something like that, and we pull them up on that. It kind of extends on the pitying a little bit, doesn't it? Or both, pitying and the inspiration side. Yeah,
it might not be so obvious, the inspirational stuff, but Chris, you were at school in a wheelchair. Would you like to comment on this one?
Yeah, well, I used to use an electric wheelchair to get around in high school, and at the end of high school, my high school basically gave me an award for, I don't know, finishing high school. They just thought it, because I had a disability, that they thought they'd just give me an award to think that it was doing me good, and it just made me feel like crap.
So it was tokenistic. It was. Yeah.
I didn't need it, and they probably thought they were doing the right thing, but in the end, it wasn't.
And do people inform you you're inspirational at any other time, Chris?
They do all the time. I get it all the time in public, especially if I'm having a quiet drink down the pub. I get lots of drunk people come over and they mean no harm, but it gets annoying that they tell me that I'm inspirational and I'm doing a great job existing. um, yeah, and it gets old very, very fast.
In our resources links that we'll send to you, we've got a video from the late Stella Young, person with cerebral palsy and a comedian and a real public advocate of people with disabilities, and she talks about inspiration porn. People being held up because they've achieved some minor thing, real or just sort of normal thing, and it's like, oh well, you're so inspiring, you know, you did that. But, and she also at school had an award given to her for no apparent reason that she could figure out, simply for existing. She says, if you do something wonderful, like win a gold medal at the Paralympics, sure, be inspired. You know, we're all inspired by people who achieve amazing things, but not for just existing. So whatever the disability may be, as I mentioned earlier, you can use this wonderful thing called Google, and or the search engine of your choice. Look it up, find out stuff.
Yeah, I can give an example of when I did that, Jed, in the workplace. When I worked at a youth centre, I was asked to do facilitate or create a group for girls with autism, and I didn't have a lot of experience with autism, so I went to Autism SA. I did a workshop. Then I organised for Autism SA, because I lived in SA, sorry, to come out and do a bit of on-the-job training with the new volunteers in the program. And the volunteers loved that because it made them feel a lot more confident, and were better able to engage with the young girls in the group.
Yep, and of course, when we say do some research, think holistically. Don't just research up the medical condition and the medications or whatever. Research up the language that people prefer, particular challenges that people might have. Maybe challenges they can manage on their own, or maybe challenges they want assistance with.
You can also, so for example, with the autism, there's Autism Awareness Australia, and I'm fairly sure I saw that they have an information line or a hotline, so you can ring up for advice. And then there are other places as well, like the Council for Intellectual Disability. They have an amazing e-newsletter that I'm subscribed up to. And they also have an advice line as well. So if you do find yourself in a situation where you're a little unsure or feel inexperienced and don't want to do the wrong thing, there are these great services out there. I guess they're advocacy services that can help you with some advice on specific situations as well.
Okay, here's the example of helping people cross the road. On WikiHow, you've got guides for pretty much everything, haven't you? And here there's detailed information on exactly what to do. That stuff of approaching, introducing yourself, asking if they need help, and so on.
Someone told me a story once that they were going up an escalator and people just come up and they'll just grab their arm without even speaking to them. And it's an invasion of space, you know, touching someone without their consent. Even though you're doing it with good intentions, it makes people feel very, very uncomfortable. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, everybody in the world has some basic needs, at least according to the late William Glasser. I'd recommend you look him up if you like. He invented choice theory, which you may have heard of. And he identifies 5 basic needs that whatever culture you're from, you need to have them met to be a happy human being. Now, these people here, they're meeting some of those needs. They're socialising and eating. It's a little bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but he doesn't put them hierarchically. I'll let you have a read of those. We'll get into them a little bit. I'll just define what power means here. It's not about controlling other people, power, and it might be about having a bit of a purpose in life, feeling like you've got agency in the world. Now, I'd just like you to consider trying to match some of these things up. If you read those lists, you'll see that on the left you've got the basic need, and on the right you've got a way to meet that need. So if I was typing in the chat, I could type here 1E, and that shows that I reckon number 1 matches up with E. And I invite you to have a go at typing in a number that corresponds to a need and a letter that corresponds with a way to meet that need. And we'll see how we go collectively and match. Well, look, here they come. 2, power and purpose, to get a law degree. 1E, someone agrees with me. Excellent. 2C, to get a law degree. 4A, a glass of water helps us survive. 3D, love and belonging, to socialise with friends. And finally, 5B, to explore a town. All right, we're all in great agreement there. Thanks, everybody. Okay, so we get the picture there. People need to be able to do some certain things to get their needs met, and people meet their needs in all sorts of different ways. Children like to say that ice cream is necessary for their survival rather than carrots, but there you go. Now, a lot of you mentioned earlier on in the chat something that you liked to do on the weekend, such as watch movies. Now I'd like you to imagine an impairment. And I want you to type that impairment in the chat. So it doesn't have to be too related to what you like to do on the weekend, but just type an impairment that comes into your mind into the chat. And I'd like you to associate that with and see if it affects what you like to do. So if you put, I like to watch movies and I'm deaf, you can see that could be a little bit problematic. People wrote just what I was writing. We need to do that. All right, we're going to move along. Thank you for your contributions. So let's just have a look at a couple of these things. So let's say somebody likes gardening but they're in a wheelchair. So what we see here is the impairment has been overcome by a specially designed pod here to help people in wheelchairs reach into the garden. And below, someone said they like to watch movies and they've got a hearing impairment. And of course we have closed captions. So it not only says any dialogue on the screen, but also what the sounds are, like spooky music or car accelerating, whatever.
I like to have brunch with some people.
Like to have brunch with some people, but I'm afraid of interacting with people is one of the things in the chat. So for many of these things, there's ways of helping people get those needs met. Some more challenging, more obvious than others.
Oh, that's Chris's dog, sorry.
Bit of texture there. Now, the person with the disability will have a pretty good lived experience of what they need to meet their needs. So you can ask away. Note of caution with that, if you are asking people how they can get their needs met, only do it when it's necessary. There's a need and you want to find out if they've got any ideas on how to meet it. Don't just chit-chat for the sake of it, because it's kind of, again, gets old, gets boring if people want to talk about the person's disability all the time. Furthermore, don't assume that you know how to meet the need for somebody without checking with them necessarily.
Mm.
Another thing to know when you're talking with people, as far as our knowledge of how to talk about disability, you talk to that person. Don't talk to their carer. It happens all over the place. Have you had that happen, Chris?
Oh, heaps of times. Especially when I first met Cecily, the CEO of Leap, at a disability expo. She's actually the only one who actually spoke to me face to face. Everyone else I spoke to was speaking to my carer. And like, I can speak for myself, like you can speak to me.
That's really interesting because that's even at a disability expo, Chris.
Yeah, it was terrible.
Where you think that people may be a little bit more aware of that. Interesting.
Okay, that one's fairly obvious. Janine, do you want to make a comment here? About guide dogs?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say other examples of you going up and just patting a guide dog, asking for permission, or just even, like I mentioned before, touching people without their consent to help them.
People in wheelchairs get very annoyed with other people leaning on their wheelchairs, pushing them around without being asked and that sort of thing.
Mm.
Okay, moving on from knowledge, and I hope we've given you now some of the things to familiarise yourself with, like disability law, things to say and not to say, thinking about people's impairments and how they might be overcome, and now into noticing what people might need. What do we notice about this t-shirt? Lost my chat window, haven't I? So we might notice that there seems to be an assumption that often people in wheelchairs, we don't think about them being in long-term loving relationships. And if we don't think about that, then we might not think of ways to helping overcome that. or having sexual needs met, whatever. There's a lot around, isn't there, around coupling up. I've got a big pink arrow to show what you might be noticing here. Person's at the beach, they're feeling their freedom, fantastic, they're having fun. But look at that wheel in the sand. What can we do about that? There's probably certain types of wheelchairs that are adapted to beaches, but also on some beaches, there's actually mats that get rolled out so people on wheelchairs can go right down to the water without having to get clogged up with sand.
Yeah, quite a lot of beaches in South Australia, and I think quite a couple on the eastern suburbs of Sydney are putting these in now, so it's great.
Now, we might not have a rolled up mat for the beach in our bag, but it might be something to advocate for, to get happening if we see there's a need for that. There's
actually a website out, I can't remember what it is, but we'll put it in the handout, of an organisation that actually is helping people put these mats out across beaches.
Okay, another quite simple one. Giving someone a glass of water if they're going to have trouble getting themselves one. But again, don't just start running up to people with glasses of water. Ask if they want one. Don't assume anything.
Hey Chris, do you remember when you started here and I put a straw in your glass?
Oh yeah, you didn't think I could pick it up.
Yeah, so that's a classic example of an assumption. No, we actually bought them specifically for you. So I thought I was doing the right thing. And Chris graciously accepted it, I think, the first couple of times. And then he said to me, oh, I don't need a straw, thanks. And I tell you what, when he said that, I was absolutely mortified that I had assumed that he needed one. And it was a very big learning curve for me. So yeah, thanks Chris for being so understanding about my stuffer.
That's all right.
We might notice someone maybe who doesn't have use of their arms or doesn't have any arms is getting frustrated with, I don't know, using their computer, and there's ways around that. Of course, there's speech recognition now, but there's also this aid here that helps people type using their mouth. Now, you might not be able to provide these aids or do what is necessary to overcome the impairment in society. So we're going to mention advocacy and empowerment now. Here's a little boy. You can see he's having some work done on his legs, and he's got a special swing in the playground. Now, not every playground has a special swing. What is to be done? Well, first of all, we've got to notice that there's a need. We might notice that by seeing a child excluded from participating because the playground isn't set up for it, and then figure out ways to get that need met. This is an example of a website in Sydney, an opportunity to contribute to the discussion about what is needed in an inclusive play space. So the people who are building that playground are putting out a survey to get input from the community. Breaking down the advocacy side of things, there's different ways to interact here: assist, advocate, and empower. Now, assist is fairly obvious stuff of kind of direct help. We've talked about that a bit. Then we have advocacy, and as I said, the late Stella Young, who will send you a link to a TED Talk video about, was a passionate advocate pretty much on an international stage for people with disabilities. She was the one who talked about inspiration porn. So to advocate means to act or speak on behalf of another person or group, which is what she did, and she is part of that person or group. Even better, however, sorry, I'm jumping ahead a bit here. There's also groups that do advocacy, peak body type ones. This is the Stand By Me campaign, which is a group whose the campaign is about keeping funding for advocacy groups because there's a plan to cut funding for them by 2020. So there's a campaign that this is a necessary function in our society for people to be collectively advocated for.
I think the Council for Intellectual Disabilities quite involved in that campaign. I'm sure a lot of them are.
Empowerment here might be as simple as, rather than you typing a letter for a blind person, put that on their keyboard and they can type their own letter. I guess a general principle of welfare workers, don't do for someone what they can do for themselves. If they can dress themselves, don't dress them. If they can type a letter and they only need something like this to help them, then give them that so that they can write their own letters. They don't have to wait around for somebody to come and advocate for them. They can do it themselves. Chris, would you like to be that in relation to getting a ramp in the workplace here?
Oh yeah, it's it's great now that I don't have to go around the long way and I don't have to ask someone to give me a hand down the other ramp.
But who had to research getting the ramp, Chris?
Sorry. Basically, the CEO of Leap, Cecily, she told me about it, and then I went away and I just did all the research myself, and I set it all up. I contacted them, and then they contacted us at Leap here, and it's taken a bit of time, but we're getting there.
How did it make you feel that you were in control of that process?
Oh, it was great. Like, it's fantastic. Something was getting done.
Okay, we're just about into wrap-up mode now, so we'll just finish off a bit quickly. Your knowledge, some knowledge of the rights and laws and policies that there are to protect and to make sure that people get their needs met. Here's an example of someone not getting their needs met.
Oh yes, this has been in the news recently this week actually. So she basically went to go into a restaurant with her guide dog. She was refused service. She even has a card that says that she's permitted, that she has a guide dog, and that and it's actually against the law. It's discrimination to be refused service as well. And she says in the article that she's refused service all the time when it comes to taxis, all kinds of things. And basically this incident has been the last straw for her. Now she's standing up for herself and other people who go through these same experiences. And I think I can't remember the organisation, if it's the Deaf Blind Association, or they get at least one a week or one a month complaint of people being refused service. So she's advocating for there to be on-the-spot fines by the police to crack down on this. She's had enough, and it's yeah. I couldn't believe it when I read it, that this is still happening in our society today. And there was a family there who got up and left the restaurant to advocate for her as well, and said, well, if you're not letting her in, we're out of here. So that's a nice direct advocacy.
So to finish off, we just want you to be aware that there are conventions, there are laws, there are policies that mean people can refer to a document and say, hey, you're supposed to be doing this, here's the law, so you better make sure you do it, hey, or you could be in trouble. So there's some examples from the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And I guess even this webinar itself is to promote awareness to combat stereotypes, those sort of things. And of course, we've talked about the Disability Act earlier on. And in the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, here's a nice sort of list that covers all the things to bear in mind about people's rights. Quite a few there, so I do recommend that you look up that act, that convention, I should say. All right, I think we'll probably wrap up at this point. What I would like to do is say, if you've got other things to move on to, please do. But I'd like to keep the chat open for a little while, just so we can have a bit of discussion and comment on there.
We'll just try and find it again because we accidentally closed it.
We'll go stop share. That's just how these things find their way into changing community attitudes. You might have seen YouTube links along the way. We're going to send those to you. Where's our chat window gone? Okay, there it is.
Okay.
Probably go back to share screen then. So please feel free to type any discussion you wish if you want to hang around in the chat, and we'd be very interested to see your comments. We'll also be sending you out those resources, and we'll also be sending you a post-webinar survey to get your feedback on the experience, the content, the sound, the vision, whatever you want to comment on.
Chris,
Yep.
we also have Chris with us as well. So if any of you have any questions that you'd like to ask Chris directly, please, you may use this opportunity. We invite you to ask any questions.
Feel free.
So does anyone have any questions?
No comments.
Oh, thank you. Can we provide this webinar to community groups in the future? Did we remember to record this one?
Oh yeah, we set it to automatically record.
Awesome.
Yep. So we can provide the link to that.
Thanks for presenting this information. We're always learning. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Heather.
Oh, thanks, Heather. Fabulous.
Thank you, Jody.
That interactive. Thank you. And we will be sending out a survey as well. So it would be very helpful if you could do the quick survey for us as well and give us the feedback in that. And as we mentioned earlier on in the webinar, we will also send out a little handout to support the topics that we've discussed, and also a multitude of links.
Not too many, but
a multitude.
Some cherry-picked ones.
And
yep.
I should say, there's a multitude of information on the internet that you can definitely get your hands on. There's actually so much out there. And like I mentioned, we can't talk about every single individual scenario. So if you do get a little bit stuck, there are those hotlines and helplines out there that can give you some specific advice for your specific situations and help you feel a lot more confident. Yeah. No questions for Chris?
Oh.
Oh, you let off the hook, Chris.
I guess it's a bit hard for people to tell the scope of Chris's disability, so I can understand that. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you all very much, and we will
Send
sign
those things
off,
out.
I guess.
Yep, we'll be signing off. And enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And what time have we got? 36, not bad.
And meeting.
Okay.